there typically is no obligation of the licensor to give out the license. Then basically you're stranded, you're lost. You can't use the software anymore, at least not legally.
And there we have again the similar problem that the maintainer is not longer responding to us and not reacting any longer.
That's very interesting. So you basically chain it down the future to the open source track.
Hello, Arne.
Hello, Gregor.
Long time not see, not speak.
Yeah, like a week or something like that.
A long time.
Yeah.
Arne, today I have some questions.
Go ahead.
As you know, I have to do somehow with software development. Mm-hmm. And when you have to do with software development, you have to do with a lot of open source software and also a lot of open source libraries, which you integrate in your own software, right? So, yeah. And you have to do there with a variety of different licenses and a lot of different challenges, let me call it that way. Mm-hmm. So one challenge I, for example, faced recently was we used an open source software where the software itself was published on, for example, GitHub. Mm-hmm. But it was not free for use. It was just free to look into the code and also recommend, for example, changes to the software, etc. Mm-hmm. But to be able to use it, especially in a commercial environment, you still have to pay once per year fee for that. Mm-hmm. So, and last time everything was perfect. And then 3 months before it runs out, we decided to extend, let me say, the license again and requested from the maintainer again a new license, but the maintainer doesn't reply to us. Neither the site was still available. So we don't know what right now happened with this maintainer. So maybe he simply don't want to maintain it any longer. He said whatever. We simply don't know, right? So, but what can people do in situations like us?
It's a terrible situation. So here's to start with the blunt answer. Not very much, most probably. Here is the detailed analysis without going too deep, but just mentioning the outline. So what's happening here is that whoever the maintainer is, they give you the right to use the software that is a license on a time-based basis. So basically for 1 year, and that's perfectly. They're good, right? They can do that. So if you give somebody a license, you can structure it in many ways. It can be a perpetual license, can be a free license. It can be only for a certain region, for certain types of use, or only for a limited time. That's perfectly normal. Now, the thing to understand here is that there is no obligation, or in only very rare cases, we can leave them aside for our purposes here. There typically is no obligation of the licensor to give out the license. So they may choose to do so, and very often if they work on a commercial basis, it's in their best interest to give you a license, but you have no right to demand a license. So if they say no, they decide not to give you a license, or if they simply disappear. And there are tons of reasons. You mentioned a few. They could have gone out of business. Maybe the maintainer they died, or maybe they just lost interest in the project and thought it's too much hassle to maintain it. All of those reasons are perfectly valid, and they don't give any licenses out anymore. Then basically you're stranded, you're lost. You can't use the software anymore, at least not legally. And especially, even if you want to take the risk, and I don't recommend that, I'm obviously a lawyer, but especially if you work for somebody else or you create software and you sell this piece of software as a part of a bundle of other things, you put your customers into risk if you continue to do that without a license. So basically you don't have a license and you don't get a new license because the maintainer just decides to not do that anymore. And in those cases, there's not really much you can do other than to substitute this piece of software with something else that does the same job. And whether you license that from somebody else or you have to code it yourself, that's another matter, another question. I'm sorry, I have no better news at this point.
It's a very great news. Okay.
Sorry.
There are also other cases I faced recently. right? So for example, very often I also see libraries, also software, where I can find no, let me say, indication for the use license. Maybe they simply are not licensed under something. Maybe the maintainers simply forget that. It sounds a little bit strange to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. There is again relatively blunt legal answer, and I know it may not go down well with techie people and people, especially in the open source. And I have to say that there are two hearts beating in my chest because I used to be a member in a number of associations in the open source environment and actually contribute to them. For example, I was a member in KDE e.V., which was the German association maintaining the KDE Linux desktop. So I'm familiar with the problem. I'm also familiar with the fact that very often, I mean, some open source proponents spend a lot of time thinking about the license because they understand that the license is a very interesting tool. If you talk about GPL, for example, it's a very interesting tool to put legal restrictions on what you can do with a certain software project and to keep it basically open source. It's very interesting. So you basically chain it down the future to the open source track. So these people understand very well that the license is a tool like that, and they use it very well crafted licenses. It's one thing. Others don't care so much because they have a kind of a disregard. They are more like the renegades, the rebels. They don't want to have to do with the law, which I kind of understand. If all you want to do is program machines, why would you care about this? But then again, this negligence leads to certain undesired side effects. And that may be one of these side effects. And here's the thing, legal thinking. If you don't, and there's no requirement to choose a specific license, but if you don't even offer your work, your software under any license, it can be a homemade, a self-made license, that's perfectly okay. But if you don't offer it under any license at all, then I cannot use it. There are certain edge cases where you release something under a copyleft regime where you say, I don't even care about this, do with it whatever you want, which also is kind of a license, interestingly enough, under it's a do with it what you want license under legal terms. But if you don't say anything, not even copyleft, I don't want to have anything to do with that, then simply there is no license. It's not there for the taking. This is not something you find in the wild, and because nobody puts a sign on it with a price tag or some terms of use, you can use it. That's not how it works. If there is no indication about, again, terms of use or conditions of use, then you have to respect that this is the works of somebody else. It's up to them to decide what you, not having created that piece of work, can do with it, or whether you can do anything with it at all. And again, I have to come back to what I said with your previous case. There is no right under which you can demand to use this piece of code, this piece of software. In most cases, there are some edge cases that the law knows, mostly having to do with monopolies and these kind of things where you can demand a license. But it's very hard to see that this is one of these edge cases that could apply here. So I don't see that. So to wrap it up, in this situation, I would say, well, you can't use it. You found it. You can have a look into it. You can understand it. You can, but you can't use it. Yeah. Bad news. I'm sorry.
Thank you again for the sad answer, but okay.
Yeah, but does it happen very often? I mean, is this a case that happens on a regular basis? I mean, my impression was that most open source projects are pretty well organized and people spend quite a lot of thinking on these questions, on these issues, and come up with rather sensible solutions. Very often, I should say that it's well organized. Many projects are.
The point is, I see very often projects, especially modern ones, with has licenses, and they're also thought carefully about the license.
Yeah.
But the issue is also this library is sometimes based on other libraries, and this again on other libraries, and then so on and so forth. but there's always the risk that some of those libraries which are in the chain of this, let me say, dependencies, I, for example, find several times libraries which simply has no license attached to it. That's also the reason why I asked you this question, right?
There's an interesting thought. If I may add one idea here or one thought, because I was concerned with one project that actually had a license, but the publisher thought it might not, they might have not chosen the license that wisely in the past. And what they wanted to do is to relicense the project, to put it under another license, which is, if it's a huge project, pretty tough undertaking, because you have to go through a elaborate process. And how the process looks in detail depends very much on the license you come from, the license where you want to go to, and how many people are involved, and also how good-willed they are, and if you took precautions already under their old license. So if you already put a clause in there that would permit for a relicense or not, and also which type of contribution you can substitute with others. So it's a difficult undertaking. But my point is, sometimes what you have to do in these projects, so that they don't die because of license issues, you just have to go through them with a comp, basically, find out which licenses contradict each other or hinder further development of the project, and then just simply either throw these parts out and substitute them with something else, or go through such a relicense process for those parts. So it's a lot of housekeeping, a lot of maintenance you have to do there. I understand it's a lot of work.
Okay, so, and right now, coming to the point, assuming we have a project which has a common license, like, for example, the GPL, the GNU public license, or, for example, the MIT license, right? And there we have, again, the similar problem that the maintainer is not longer responding to us and not reacting any longer. So what happens now with this project?
Well, if it's under a license and the license doesn't require any action from the maintainer, so to say, yes, you can use it, but it's under one of these licenses that allow use under certain conditions, under a lot of well thought out boundary conditions, of course, but allow this use to the general public, then you may just do that, as long as you keep the license and you adhere to the stipulations in the license. You are free to use it, even if the maintainer of the project, for some reason, then again, in the best case, I don't hope they died, but went out of business or something. But then just to make that, because you mentioned dying as a cause of not responding, it is my understanding that some of these open source projects go back 30, 40, 50 years in time, especially if you think about GNU, for example. That's not a new project. So these things may happen. These things may happen. So there may be biological reasons for somebody not responding to a license request or any request at all. So it's perfectly possible, yes. Okay.
Good to know. And right now, maybe my last question to this kind of different licenses is, so I, for example, also came across another, I would say, not very common license for open source code, but I still faced it. There was, for example, the Creative Commons attributions, no changes. Right now I have issues to speak it out. 4.0 international. So there, for example, I also faced a problem that the maintainer was not longer responding to us. So especially in this kind of license, what are my options right now?
Yeah, it depends on what exactly you want to do. So as I understand it, this specific, and the Creative Commons license can be kind of configured what you do. So can you do derivatives or not? Do you have to do some attribution or not? So you have to mention the original creator of the works. Can you use it commercially? Yes or no? So it can be configured. And if it's configured in a weird way, like here, so you have to mention, but you cannot create any derivatives, well, then basically you can't create those derivatives, period. There is, and depending on how your case works, there may be some edge cases where you can actually, by law, change or modify the software to a certain extent. So what most laws allow, for example, the German copyright law, which is in this part based on a European directive, so it should be true for all laws of the European Union at least, allows for correction of defects and errors in the software. So you could do that.
Okay.
If you do have a license, so there is a license, so your license, I mean, you have to have a license, otherwise you can't. If you have no right to use, then you're out of the game anyway. But if you do have a license and there is this defect that hinders you from using the software, so you may correct that defect. That's possible. However, while this is a very interesting and limited right, there are other rights like interoperability with other software. So you want an AP call to another software, so you may do that. But what you may not do, you may not add more functionality.
Okay.
Or put new features in, these kind of things. You can't do that because you just have no right, and there is it's none of these edge cases that's mentioned in the copyright law, where again the law, you have to understand what it does. Yeah, it permits you to do something without or against the consent of the licensor. So it's a pretty hefty and stark right. So you have to limit it to cases where even the law says, okay, in these cases we have to allow that, otherwise all of this is perfectly useless. But adding new functionality is not part of that. So if that's something you want to do, well, you're out of the game here if you can't get the permission of the licensor. Yes.
Short break. Mm-hmm. Do we maybe also want to make a note regarding the, let me say, exception in this license that you can make a change, but you're not allowed to make it publicly. So you're not allowed
let's do that. Yes,
to push it back to the community. So you can make it for your own stuff, especially for this license, but you cannot push it back to the community.
Do you want to make this intro or?
Just you can just do it, and you can just say, especially in this case this license, there's an exception.
Okay.
Da, da, da.
Okay. There's maybe one thing I should add specifically with regard to this license, the Creative Commons license. And there, what the text says, and it may be some relief or maybe it's not. The text says that you personally, you may actually create derivatives, you may modify the software. However, the point is that you cannot distribute these modified pieces, these derivatives, any further. So you cannot channel that back into the project or the community or anything. So you privately, you can do whatever you want, build on the project, but neither can you build software that is to be distributed, nor can you go back to the community and say, hey, I created this wonderful fork, supported all of you. You're not allowed to do that. So basically, all you can do is do a very private fork. This is how I understand it. And the question is, it's maybe a question for you. Is that useful in many cases, especially considering that you lose this support of the open source community, of the project community, basically?
That's a very tough question because it depends on the library and where I use it, right? So for example, when I have a library which I'm only using for internal tools, right? Mm-hmm. So then make a fix. Maybe I invest a lot of time in it, but I cannot, let me say, so it's just for me, but no one will ever get another outcome out of it, right? So something positive rather than just me. So assuming I have a library in my software, which I maybe also distribute to customers of me, or I have another open source library, which is depending on that, then I more or less, I should consider to switch to another piece of software, because then even when I fix it, I cannot distribute then my software out of it because this other library is part of it, right? So,
that could be very well an outcome and a very undesired outcome. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So maybe you have some final words to us, some final recommendations, what we can do with this stuff we learned today.
Yeah, there's actually, we kind of already hinted at the ideas, but the most obvious thing is know under which license your pieces of software. I see this as a puzzle. You probably have not one piece, you have many pieces in your software, because open source is so prevalent these days, and you can't start developing a project from scratch. It's just not there. The world has become too complicated. But you should be aware of what you put in your project, under which license it is being licensed, and whether or not, two things, I think the licenses are compatible with what you want to do with the software, and also how this will play out on the long run going forward. I mean, and I have to come back here to this idea that software these days tends to stick around for years and even decades. So you have to think very much into the future. And it used to be different. I mean, I remember the times in the 80s when I started to code a bit. I mean, you would have a game on an 8-bit computer and would have 16 kilobytes or something. You would buy it, and in a year it would be gone. Yeah. But these days, these projects, operating system, again, think Linux, they stick around for decades, and they will be sticking around for more decades, and projects will be around for decades. So you have to think future-proof in your licensing. So to find one umbrella for that, choose your licenses and pieces of software under which these licenses are very wisely, and thinking about all these, putting all these considerations into the game. That's what I have to recommend, because otherwise you may face problems down the road, and they may pop up here and there. And if not today, then a year or 2 or 5 from now.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, maybe it's also on top of that another learning, because I just learned it from some of those projects. Mm-hmm. Maintainer can also disappear, and we don't know why. And we should also have an answer what we should do then, right? So combine with the licenses. Yeah, thank you very much. So you really answered some of my questions very well. Although,
if not satisfactory.
So that's the unfortunate case. So I hope there might be a better answer to this. So a nicer answer from me, but okay. Right now I have to take some actions. Thank you very much for that.
You're more than welcome. And well, there's one more thing we should say at this point of time, I guess, directed to our viewers. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or any comments or any anecdotes, any stories you want to share, like the one that Gregor shared here from his life as a CTO, please put them in the comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. See you next time again.
See you next time.